We're all watching the news today, and it's pretty obvious what time it is. But here's the big question. Are you ready? Are your preps ready? In this video, we're going to talk about the #1 most important prep. If you are behind on your preps, if you are just starting prepping, this is the one you need to focus on right now.
I love the chase and the hunt, and I set the pace when I'm running. I always take what I want and I always give it 100. Don't need a bank, no I'm funded. Play the game like it's nothing. I'm always thankful for something. Don't take for granted, stay humble. Now waiting, better believe in your mind, cause it's everything. You can mold, shape, find almost anything.
Hey everybody, this is Praxis. In this video I want to talk about the most important aspect to prepping and preparedness, and that is the idea of setting back, securing a supply of food. Now a lot of people might disagree with that. They might say, well, defense is more important because if you can't defend your stuff, then what's the point of having it in the first place? Well, I'd kind of flip that around on its head and say, well, if you don't have anything to defend in the first place, nobody's going to be coming after you anyway. People are not going to be marauding after the apocalypse to try to get back issues of X-Men comic books. First, you have to have something worth stealing before you bother to worry about whether or not you can defend it. So let's start with first things first, something that's valuable to, unfortunately, to other people, but also really to yourself, and that is food. Now, there are tons of videos here on YouTube about how to secure a prepper pantry. What makes this video different is that I want to address it in the way that I approach these things. There's a lot of videos I see out there where people are talking about getting a ton of food really fast, doesn't matter how much it costs, and people end up buying these giant tubs of industrial grade garbage. There are other videos where people don't want to spend very much and they are talking about going to the dollar store and you pick up this, and this for this week, and that's an alright way of doing it if you want to do it kind of slowly and you have plenty of time to get it done. But the way I want to approach it is the way that I approach these things, and that is I want to get a lot of high quality food quickly and have a way of storing it. I want to focus on foods that are going to last a long time. So if I buy something and I don't want to use it for a while, it's not a situation where I'm losing a lot of that investment when the stuff spoils or rots. And that's what I'm going to be talking about in today's video. But one thing I'm not going to be talking about is the idea of calorie counting, like how many calories for how many people for how many days and all that kind of stuff. I liken that type of thinking to going into an auto dealership to buy a new car, and you pull out your wallet and you're kind of flipping through your nickels and your pennies and your dimes to try to see if you have enough. The one thing that you can be sure of if you're doing that is you don't have enough. And I think that's most people's problem when it comes down to food. There are very few people that have too much food. The big problem for most people is just getting more in. So that's what we're going to be focusing on in this video. And again, like I said, we're going to be focusing on foods that have an extremely long shelf life. So you don't have to worry about getting these things and having them go bad. I'm breaking today's video up into 3 sections: calories, protein, and nutrition. The first one we're going to be dealing with is calories and all the different options you have for that. Welcome to my pantry. Now, the first step on our tour is calories. For thousands of years, humans have felt that grains are a great way of storing calories for long term. And at the mention of grains, I'm sure I'm going to trigger a bunch of people. Whenever you get into health and nutrition and diet and all that kind of stuff, there's a lot of people that have very strongly held beliefs and allergies and all that kind of stuff. I just want to say I'm just going to gloss over all that. Take what works for you, leave what doesn't, and if you have a lot of negative feelings and emotions that you just need to get out, the comments are a great place for that, and it's an excellent use of your time as well. It's not like there's more important things to do than vent out angry frustration here on YouTube. But, make your decisions. That's up for you guys to decide. I'm going to share what works for me. If some of it works for you, great. If none of it works for you, I'm sorry. And if some of it works, take what does and leave what doesn't. So we're talking about grains, and there are 3 grains that I think are really excellent performers in terms of storing the calories that we're looking to store, and also for lasting for a long-term food storage kind of situation. Those are oats, rice, and wheat flour. Wheat flour, I know I'm triggering a bunch of other people that might have gluten allergies, and I'm sorry for that. Use the other 2 of those work for you, but those are the 3 that I tend to find work really well for me. They're very inexpensive, they last a long time, and they pack a lot of calories. Now, as you're going about buying these things, I mentioned in the introduction that there are different approaches to how you can buy this stuff. A lot of people say, well, you just go to the Dollar Tree store and you buy a bunch of these little kind of things. I'm not advocating for that. I obviously own one of these. I bring these around when I go camping because they're great for packing up. It's a single serve kind of thing. But if you're talking about getting a big food supply for yourself, you want to be looking at the very smallest, something like this. This is a 20-pound bag of white rice in there, and that is how you want to be building your pantry. You're going to be paying much less per pound if you're buying stuff in the 20-pound, 25-pound, 50-pound bags. It is going to be so much cheaper for you in the long term or even the medium term than buying it in all these little packages. When it comes to protein and prepping, I think the big thing that most people think of is beans. And beans are a good way to do that, and I have a lot of beans here. We have kidney beans and a lot of pinto beans, black beans, garbanzo beans, also known as chickpeas. We have a lot of that. I don't buy any of them in these small bags. I was just given this by somebody that decided they didn't want it. I'm always buying that in 25-pound bags, and you can store those for the long term. And whenever they are dried, I've never had any kind of beans ever spoil as long as they were stored properly. And again, we're going to talk about how to store things properly at the end. Now, one thing with beans is that they are more tender when they are younger. If you're storing it for several years, when you cook it, I'm not going to say you can't get them soft, because you can soften them up, but it's different. It's different. You know, you'd have to really try it out yourself. There's a tenderness that the beans kind of lose after like a year or so. And, you know, suck it up if you want to keep eating. That's kind of been my approach. But another approach that I have is just diversify, not just depend on beans alone. There are a lot of other things that you can have. Another one is nuts, and not all nuts are created equal when it comes to long-term storage. I've got some pistachios here. Pistachios seem like they last pretty well for long-term storage. Cashews seem like they last really well. Almonds last really well. One nut that does not last really well, and I think it's not technically even a nut, is peanuts. Peanuts do not last very well for long-term storage. I've unfortunately lost a couple of large orders of peanuts that I had gotten when I was first starting in with having a big pantry. They would just go rancid, and they ended up being squirrel food, and the squirrels really appreciated them, but they weren't something that I was appreciating. If you do like peanuts, though, there is one way to store them that I find lasts a long time, and that is in their butter form. Peanuts of a butter variety. If you're looking for peanuts, peanut butter would be the way to go for that. Also, different ways of consuming animals that you have stored for a long period of time. I've had really mixed experiences with jerkies, turkey jerky and all that kind of stuff. So I don't really rely on that as a long-term food storage option. I keep it here, and I'll occasionally use that, if I need a little bit more protein for like regular times. But in terms of long-term storage, I don't see them as being very viable, because I've had lots of situations where I open up a jerky and it's like, oh, that ain't getting eaten by anybody. That's pure compost material right there. But one type of meat that I have found lasts an awfully long time is sardines, and these are in extra virgin olive oil. It's almost like you're eating tuna fish. It's not the same as tuna fish. It is not at all the same as eating tuna fish, including the fact that it doesn't have nearly as much mercury as a tuna fish does. I have stored those in excess of 10 years, and I've never had any issues with any of those. So those are a couple of different options that you can look at. There's the canned meats, there are the nuts, there are the beans, whatever kind of works for you, whatever works with your diet, you got a lot of options there. The last topic I wanted to talk about was nutrition, but you could also call it flavor, because a lot of the other things that we've talked about are just, dried beans, dry rice. You just hydrate that stuff up and it doesn't taste very good. You really want to add something to it so that you don't just vomit up all the calories that you just ate. So we're going to be talking about flavor, we're going to be talking about nutrition, because the two go really hand in hand, and there's a lot of different ways to address it. I've got a couple of things right here. This is a simmer sauce. This is an Indian simmer sauce. This is saag. There's all different types of curries and things like that. And while these are not the cheapest things to buy, like this can here probably costs a couple of dollars, you can take a can like this and you can spread it out to flavor an enormous amount of food. So this is a dense, packed can full of nutrition and flavor, and you can feed like a whole family with just one of these cans. Another thing is here's some salsa. Salsa can be cooked up, like you can take some salsa and mix it in with rice while you're cooking. So you take some rice and some bouillon. We're going to talk about bouillon in a little bit, but rice, bouillon, and a little bit of salsa, and you're making yourself kind of like a Mexican Spanish kind of flavored rice. Other things that you can get, like I just mentioned, bouillon cubes are a great thing to have. These have a pretty long shelf life, but if you want to store these for the really long term, I would suggest taking these, put them in a freezer bag and put them in your freezer, because if you store these for more than a couple of years, sometimes the oils can start coming out of them, and they ain't looking so hot after a little while. It's usually when I get salt, I'll buy it in a big bag and I'll put it in a bucket. We're going to talk about storage in a little bit. This was something I just picked up a couple of years ago, and I just set on the shelf because it's pretty easy to use until it gets humid, and now this thing's just a rock in there. Not a big deal. You can cut the top off, and you can take a fork and you can scrape it off slowly. But if you want to buy a lot of salt for long-term storage, don't get it in one of these. Get it in a big bag, put it inside of a bucket, put a desiccant pack in there. We're going to talk about all those kind of storage options in a little bit. But different ways of getting the same thing If it does freeze up like a rock, you can deal with it, but it's better if you don't have to deal with it. Last thing I want to talk about here is different types of dehydrated fruits and vegetables. Here is a vegetable blend. This has like carrots and onions and celery, things like that. You could put this into a soup. This stuff, again, I think this bag here was like $10 for a pound of it, but this is going to really hydrate out and be able to offer nutrition and flavor for an awful lot of soup on into the future. You can also get things like dried fruits, like dried cranberries have a really long shelf life. Raisins, I've got kind of a mixed track record with raisins. Sometimes raisins seem like they last a while, like depending on the batch, and other batches I get are kind of like, yeah, those are looking a little bit on the slimy side. I've never gotten sick having raisins that have been kind of old, and I've eaten raisins that have been in my pantry for years and years and years, so I've never gotten sick, but sometimes the raisins just start looking like not so hot. But dried cranberries seem to last really well. Dried pineapple seems to last really well. Dried papaya seems to last really well. All these different types of options, if you can keep them in a cool, dry place, they seem to last an awfully long time, and they can add a lot of not only nutrition but also flavor and excitement to a lot of dishes that you might be needing to make in an emergency situation. And there is one other way of getting absolutely fresh fruit and vegetables, and that is a method that you don't store here in your pantry. That's something that you store up here in your mind. A great way of getting fresh fruits and vegetables during an emergency situation is to just go out and forage them from the natural environment. And it's a lot easier than I think most people presume. This is a great book. This is my favorite book for North America of wild edible plants. It is a compendium of so many different things that just grow around us very, very commonly. And I would highly recommend getting this book. You don't need to know every wild edible plant in order to safely forage outside. You don't need to know every poisonous plant in order to safely forage outside. There are some plants that are very obvious, and if you just know that plant, there's nothing that looks like it that is also going to be poisonous. So you can start small and then expand from there. And in looking around here to give you guys some examples, and right here there were two. I'm sure there's more than two, but there are two that just popped right out to my eyeball. One is quickweed, and this one has little white and yellow flowers. I'll bring that over for a closer look. And the other one is my favorite, and this is called lamb's quarters. It's also known as goosefoot. And these are a couple of my favorite wild edible plants. This is the lamb's quarters, the goosefoot. This is a very, very common garden weed that it grows all over the place in North America, and it has a really nice flavor as well. It's like kind of like a wild spinach kind of flavor. And the quickweed, I'm not going to eat this one on camera because this one's more one that you want to prepare. The quickweed is a great thing to just steam up and put it into like a little stir fry, or steam it up and you put it into like a baked veggie wrap. You can eat it raw, but it's got like fur all over the leaves, and it's it's not the I like one leaf of it just to demo for you. This is more of something that you want to cook up, but honestly, I'm overplaying it. It's not that bad. But this is a great way of just getting fresh fruits and vegetables into your diet if you're in a situation where you can't go out to the grocery store to get that stuff. Because like what's in my mouth right now, it tastes just so much more alive and fresh and healthy than canned stuff or dried stuff. And canned and dried is great, and if that's all you can have access to, it's good to have access to that. But if you have the ability to get some real fresh stuff, I would highly recommend just becoming familiar with just a few, even like a dozen wild edible plants. There are a dozen really easy, really healthy, really safe wild edible plants that you can find across North America. And this book is a great entry into that world. For food storage options, there are so many different ways that you can approach that, and some foods don't even need a storage option. They come in their own storage container as it is, but not all do, and some of them, it really makes sense to put them inside some kind of a container to try to make it so that they're not exchanging air with the outside environment. There are lots of different ways that you can do that. Some of them are more expensive, some are less expensive. In my pantry, have an awful lot of 50-pound food storage bins that I have lining the very bottom shelf. I love those, but at the point of the recording of this video, those are now very expensive. They cost about $50 per bin to to acquire those. When I bought them, they were more like $25, $30 or so. So they're a lot more expensive now. This right here is a great storage option that's economical, and it stores a lot of food, and I'm a big fan of it. This is just, as you can see, a Home Depot bucket. It's made out of high density polyethylene plastic. That's number 2 plastic, which is food grade, but not all number 2 plastic, high density polyethylene plastic, is food grade. Some of it has additives added into it, and I would suspect, though I don't know, but I would suspect that these Home Depot buckets are probably on the candidate list for being the types of plastic that probably does have additives added into it. For one, there's no intent that these would ever be used for food, so there's no reason to not add those extra additives in. And on top of that, it's bright orange, so at the very least there's like some kind of dye is being put into this. I do still store food in these, but I don't store the food in a way where it is in direct contact with the outside. I have like a bag inside of them, and then I put the food inside. Now that said, if you're putting dry food in here, I wouldn't lose any sleep at night if I were doing that. Now, if I was going to put like wet soup in, maybe I'd have some concerns with that. But if, let's say, you're going to fill this up with rice, the only rice grains that are actually even touching the sides are the ones that are literally touching the sides. All the rice grains on the inside, they don't even have any interaction with the outside plastic. So for dry ingredients, I gotta imagine, and like I said, I wouldn't personally lose any sleep at night if I put a bunch of rice in here and I didn't have a bag liner. But it's easy enough to have a bag liner, and a lot of foods that you buy come with their own liner, so I just put the whole thing in there instead of dumping it in. Now, using these buckets can be a little bit of a pain in the butt, trying to peel the lids off if you've ever tried to do that. The Home Depot buckets themselves don't come with a lid. The buckets at the time of this recording are like $4, maybe $5. I've seen them like $3 at some places, but they're usually around $4 for the bucket. And the lids, I don't know how much the lids cost if you're going to buy the Home Depot lids, because I never buy them, because I never use them, because what I got on here is one of these Gamma 2 lids. These are an add-on that you can get. Now the lid itself is like $10, so the lid costs more than the bucket, but it's really, really worth it. This is the way the lid arrives when you buy them, and what it is a ring with a gasket that you snap down onto a bucket, and once this is on there, you can unscrew and screw on the lid, and it makes it just so much more functional. For years, I would just run these things with just the lids that came with them, and that's fine. But sometimes it's just you don't feel like wrenching your fingers around them. I even bought a tool which I don't really use anymore. This was for going around the edges of buckets and kind of pulling them up when I just was feeling like all arthritic, not literally arthritic, but just feeling like I don't want to deal with it. I'm gonna use a tool today. But I really love these Gamma 2 lids. It's an airtight seal, and it just makes it so easy to go in and out of the thing without it being any kind of an issue. When you put your stuff together, you definitely want to label it so that you have some clue as to what's in here. This is chocolate granola, and whenever I label them, I always do them as 2 separate labels: what's in it and then the date, because oftentimes this is going to remain the same, and this is going to change every time you get a new order of the stuff in, if you get more of it. And what I would recommend is go through an entire bucket and then put in new stuff instead of constantly adding, because if you add something and it's got like weevils or something like that in it, you don't want to be contaminating all of your old stuff when you do that. Incidentally, if you ever do get weevils in your food, I had that happen to myself once, and it's really not that big of a deal actually. It's the excrement from the weevils is not toxic to humans. Weevils are edible, and while it has kind of an ick factor to it, they are extra protein. I had a bunch of rice that I got some weevils in, and in my entire career of doing this, like 20 years or so, this has only happened to me once. I think a lot of people overplay the idea of bugs getting into their food. Maybe other people don't have pantries that are as cool or as dry as mine is, or people live in different situations, but I've only had weevils happen to me once over the entire period. I just took the buckets of food, brought them out into the car on a hot summer day, and I just baked all the buckets. I left them in there for several days until the buckets had baked all the weevils out of it, and then I just had extra protein in my rice. So it's not a huge deal, even if something like that happens to you. If it's weevils, I know it's not a problem, unless, I don't know, maybe some people have allergies to weevils. But other pests might present a different type of issue, but just because you get a pest in doesn't automatically quickly mean you have to get rid of this stuff. One thing I do to keep the environment inside here extra dry, I keep the pantry cool, but you want to keep this extra dry in here, is I do put desiccant packs in. And these are the type of desiccant packs that I use. I'll usually get 10 gram or bigger packs. And for a bucket like this, I would probably put in like maybe 2 or 3 of these kind of packs. And the way that I protect them so that if you're scooping in here, you don't rupture the pack. Now the silica that's in those packs, it's not technically toxic or anything like that. Although some silica is treated with some type of cobalt compound. I don't know, leave it to industry. If they have an option for taking some that's non-toxic and making it poisonous for people, they'll do it. But some of the dry packs actually are toxic because they have this cobalt ingredient in it. But you know, either way, you don't want to be eating the stuff. So what I usually do is I take those little packs and I take an old vitamin container and I just stick the packs in here, and then I stick that in with the food. So, and I don't screw on a lid or anything like that, just leave it open. And that way, if I'm scooping, you know, I'm going to be hitting the side of the empty vitamin container, and I'm not going to be hitting the side of the packet and potentially rupturing it and opening the thing up. As far as oxygen absorbers go, I've never used them. I've never had a problem not using them. I'm sure they're great. I'm sure they're great for some people. I own some. I've just never felt motivated enough to put them in. I was always feeling like, I don't want to waste my oxygen absorbers in this thing because I'm going to just be going in and out of it anyway. So I've never implemented them, and I've never seemed like I've had a problem. I mentioned earlier in the video that my beans, after several years, aren't as fresh feeling. Maybe if I had oxygen absorbers in there, that would make my beans taste a little bit fresher, but honestly, they're fine the way they are. So I've never really gotten into using them. If you want to experiment with them, that's great, but don't feel like you have to. So much information online, it's so many people telling you, this is the way I do it, this is the way you have to do it. This is the way I do it. This isn't the way you have to do it. This is something that works for me. These are experiences that work for me. Take this. If you don't know anything about food storage, start with it this way, riff on it. See how lazy you can get. That's one big thing with me, is I love to research something and then see how lazy I can be with it. Like how much can I pull back from the requirements on this thing before I end up creating a problem for myself. The last thing I want to mention in this video is with canned food. Do I have any canned food within arm's reach here? No, I don't see any. But canned food is a great way of storing food for long-term storage. Also, if you do your own canning, that's great. It's a lot easier than a lot of people are going to suggest to you that it is. One thing that a lot of people are oftentimes concerned with canned food is the idea of botulism. Botulism is pretty rare, but it is a major problem if it happens to you. But there is a kind of secret backdoor window to avoid getting botulism, and that is, if you ever have something that you suspect might have botulism, as long as you put it on the stove and have it be going at a good rolling boil, like a real rolling boil, not just like a light simmer, a real rolling boil for 5 to 10 minutes, that is going to destroy all the botulism toxin that's in there, and you're going to protect yourself from it. I hope you found this video helpful. Down in the description below, I've put a list of all the different topics that I talked about in this video, from the storage tubs to all the different food options. Now, most of this stuff, it makes the most sense to just get it at your local grocery store. It's the most economical to do it that way, and you can get the stuff right away. But wherever it made any sense at all, I put links to online sources for these things if you prefer to go that direction. But however you secure these things, the one thing that I would recommend to you is that you start, and you start now, because these options are only going to get more difficult as time goes on, and you have the most options at the lowest price for all of these things right now. So get off your butt and get going. That's it, and thanks for watching. Hey YouTube preppers, if you enjoyed this video, here's another one that gets much more in depth about how to build a pantry. If you're just starting out down this road, or if you've been down this road for a while and you want to up your game, this is the video you want to watch.